doing anything. Like the hardest part of a run is that first step out the door. The hardest part of any project is just opening up the IDE, maybe.
Yeah. For those who are just joining in, we're just talking about how I couldn't press the record button because this is the first podcast episode, and we're calling it "The Mind of a Serial Learner." And why did we think that was a good idea, Alicia?
This podcast is all about lifelong learning and that process and the pain, and turning that pain into a process of perhaps joy and then continued pain. But all in all, trying to lessen the fear of learning something new and taking on a new skill.
All right, maybe we should introduce ourselves first. Let me go ahead since I brought it up.
Who are you, Praveen?
That's the ultimate question. Does anyone really know who they are?
We got existential fast.
So my name is Praveen Angyan, and I basically started out with personal computers. My parents actually bought me a personal computer when I was, I think when I was 7 years old. That was the time when you had 256 kilobytes of RAM, and a 40 megabyte hard drive cost around $2,000. And me and my brother would turn on the computer and go and have breakfast and then come back and it still wouldn't have turned on. So I've been pretty lucky that I got in computers when it was getting started. This was famously the time when Bill Gates had said, I don't ever see how there's going to be more than, I should look this up in Google, but I believe he said 15 computers in the whole world or something crazy like that.
This is 15 computers across the planet. Those would be like 15 very big computers.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who'd want to share.
All right. So what about you, Alicia? Tell me a bit about yourself.
Well, Praveen, my name is Alicia MacLennan. And for me, the introduction to tech was all about video games. When I was little, we had a Texas Instruments TI-99. One of my favorite games was Hunt the Wumpus. And that segued into Apple computers at school. And I don't know, looking back at my childhood, I realized it was just set in the fabric of learning that, like, oh yeah, like you're just always on the computer. And it's grown now into such a pervasive thing that when I was little, it was go to the computer lab and learn how to type. And now I see my nieces who are 8 and 9 years old on their cell phones. They basically have the equivalent of a supercomputer in their pockets. And it's, no big deal.
Right.
Yeah. But go ahead.
Definitely that's something that I see happen. I think I was reading an article about how people are building up mind-machine interfaces. Elon Musk is doing it. There are a few other startups doing it, and they have relative success. And I'm like, I don't really care about that. And that is all science fiction. Literally, people have written science fiction books about mind-machine interfaces and other topics like that. And right now we are like not even impressed by any of that.
Exactly. It's difficult to say. Like over the holidays, I got Quest 2 VR headset, and it's amazing. Like virtual reality is absolutely stunning. That being said, that headset is so uncomfortable. It's basically like a brick on your face, and you're able to run through obstacle courses and get into shooting games, and it's so much fun. It's so realistic. But the reality is I wouldn't be doing this more than like 15 minutes a day before I'd start to feel nauseous. And so thinking about what you just described of like wearable technology, yeah, I'd get into that, but only if it were actually comfortable and it's not a chip being inserted in my brain. I'm not there yet.
And then speaking of getting existential, I've always been self-aware, and I think we both discussed how people have a self-identity. And for me, my self-identity, and this is something that I just realized recently, and this kind of ties into the concept of the whole podcast as to why I push myself to learn different things every so often. And just the way I was brought up, the way my parents brought me up, the way I was brought up in India when I was growing up, I identify everything as a test. So even at work, someone gives me a project, I think of myself that, oh, okay, this is a test. Let me study up on this. I haven't heard of this technology. I haven't heard of this process. I haven't heard of this person. And sometimes I'll look up the person. I'll find out how their name is pronounced because I want to ace the test.
Wow.
So that's something that I just recently found out. But that's actually what drives me. And I've actually had the opportunity to suck at a lot of things from playing poker to stand up. And I've also had my friends with a lot of their technical startups. And one of my friends had a PR startup. And that was actually one of the times when I was really afraid of learning something new because I've always been what I consider an introvert. And as a PR person, he had parties that lasted till 3 in the morning. There were hundreds of, maybe even thousands of people sometimes in some of the parties that he went to, and he dragged me with him.
That sounds awesome, but the reality is that sounds exhausting.
It was good for me. It was really good for me. I learned so much from that, and now any party, any social activity there's nothing that compares to that. So there's no social activity that gives me anxiety anymore.
Nice.
And what about you? We had talked about your self-identity. So what do you think?
Yeah. And I've sucked at a lot of things. And it was the adage that I eventually learned was to appreciate the challenge and that it's not so much like focusing on an innate talent or like being born with a skill. It's more so about persistence and tenacity. And just if you really want to get good at something, you have to sit with the tedium sometimes and just do it. And so like the things that I've gotten pretty decent at, flying airplanes or programming, it's because of just doing stuff. And so it's been a process of turning like that anxiety that you described into a sense of excitement and wonder and turning towards curiosity rather than trying to identify like my immediate ability with my ego, because it's not useful to do that, because if you start getting discouraged, it's really easy to just say something like, oh, I'm not a natural born engineer, so I just can't do this. So for me, it's always been about, okay, just if you want to try running, go ahead, start running. And then that eventually evolved into running marathons. And I'm not a particularly great marathon runner, but I love running marathons. I don't know what that says about me. Probably that I'm a bit of a masochist, but yeah, I just like doing stuff.
Right. Yeah, and for those of you who are just joining in, I just want to point out that Alicia and I met when she interviewed for her first programming job. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was your first programming job, right?
Yeah, I had worked at a data center for a couple of months prior, but that wasn't really programming. That was more like DevOps. But yeah, so my first programming job was that interview, Praveen. Right. So yeah.
Yeah, and the reason why we hired you was basically just because of your attitude. And I think it's an incredible attitude that you have. And that's all that's needed. I just realized looking back at all the interviews, the only people I've ever hired were people who remember the names of the people who interviewed them. People who go around the room and say, thank you, Praveen, thank you, John, thank you, Katya. Those are the only people I've hired. And those are the people who have worked out best. But there are many people who aren't even curious. They don't even remember our names. They don't even say, okay, at least for this interview, I want to learn what these people are really about, what this organization is really about. Yeah,
and I just remember I was so excited at the interview. I can't remember if I thanked you or not.
I think you did. I think you at least.
That sounds like me.
However, there's a difference. Just because I've been, I don't know if, because I know you moved on in your career, I don't know how much you're involved with interviewing other programmers, but we get a range of people in the business. There are literally people who are rushing out without even saying thank you. The interview stops and we say, oh, okay, do you have any questions for us? And we had someone who picked up their sunglasses and left. No, not even, oh, no, I don't have anything else. It just left.
Was it a particularly bad interview that they
No, I think the person was very self-absorbed because Well, okay,
dear.
okay. Here, let me come back to what really happened. He leaves the room, right? And
Uh-huh.
we had given him some brochures about what we do, what the CTSI stands for, what are some of our projects. And he comes running back into the room, and we're like, "What did you forget?" And he takes his sunglasses, which are on top of the brochures, and he leaves with that. He didn't come back for the brochures or anything. He just left with the
Oh
sunglasses.
boy.
So,
Wow. There's
yeah.
something to be said for just being a human being, even if you're nervous
Hmm.
and excited. And
Right,
I
right.
haven't interviewed programmers, but I've done a little bit of recruiting. And I went to one recruiting event where most of the people were like really into tech. And for me, I just wanted to know, okay, like what projects have you done that got you really excited about
Hmm.
tech? I don't even care like what it is. I just want to hear your excitement about it. And I remember this one person walked up to me and it wasn't even like a greeting or anything. She just simply said, "This is what I'm going to do for you." And she just started
Right,
rattling off her skills. And it was just
right,
like, "Hi, nice to meet you." And then she turned around and left. And it was just like, all right, I'm holding the resume of someone who I wouldn't want to work with. So,
right,
yeah,
right.
there's something to be said for being human.
Yeah. And I think just transitioning into what most people don't realize when you first start learning something, I'm just talking a bit about why also some people don't want to start learning something as an adult, which kind of transitions into the point of this whole podcast, is that people don't realize that when you first start learning something new, you're actually going to get either you're going to stay constant or you're actually going to get worse at it. And that throws a lot of
Hmm.
people out. You might actually start out with, let's just say, I don't know, like coding, and you're able to do the first few projects, and then someone throws a reasonably hard project and you can't even start. And then you're like, wow, I got worse. Even though the project might have been harder, people immediately get the idea that they might be getting worse. And part of that is, of course, when you first start something, people are actually literally giving you things that are very easy. So the first time you're given a challenge, you mistake not being able to approach that as, oh, okay, I'm actually getting worse the more I work at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Having that attitude of thinking, like, I can learn from this. I have no idea how to do this, but by the end, I will know how to do this versus tackling an easy problem. You're not going to learn anything from that. You're just going to do
Yes.
it like you're a robot. And that's no fun.
Yeah. And then actually kids learn all the time because what else are they going to do? Set up shop as a certified accountant?
That's awesome. Meet
and
my accountant. He's a baby.
and most of the time, kids, since they're bad at everything, they can't really tell the difference. The problem is that most people who are, let's say, I don't know what you call it, but an adult who's self-functioning. What do you call an adult who can take care of
Self
themselves?
actualized?
No, I meant that most people who can take care of themselves, they've got a job, they've got an apartment, they're paying rent, as in they're functioning members of society. Let's just call it that. They've gotten good at something. Maybe they went to school for art and now they're an art teacher, or maybe they are good at music and they're performing music, or maybe even in our case, they went to college for computer science and they got a job as an intern and they've now a junior programmer. So most people get good at something and then
Sure.
they forget that they weren't good at that something when they first started. So they immediately start comparing anything they're learning newly to, why am I not good as to this thing that I've been practicing for 10 years? Yeah. And that throws people a lot off. And that's why I was making the comparison to kids, because kids suck at everything, at least to
Oh,
start.
yeah. Kids are terrible.
Just for the audience, what she means, I hope, is that she means they're terrible at doing stuff like kids do karate, violin, coding camp,
Of
summer camp,
course, I'm
stage camp.
kidding. Kids are all,
but since
they
they're
really
learning,
are. That I think we can all learn from kids. Kids have that attitude of just doing it. A kid learning language, they don't care about being grammatically correct. They just want to get their point
Mhm.
across. And they can refine the rules of grammar later. And
Exactly.
they apply that attitude to everything. And
Mhm.
just the being goal oriented is really it's key
Yeah.
because you can't start to attach your ego to this supposed like skill set that keeps fluctuating, like you're gaining a new color belt in karate.
Right.
Although we have to apply that measurement to perhaps to have that range of gratification that, okay, you worked this hard at it. Here's a grade. Here's the certificate. Here's a diploma. But it's still, even with that, it doesn't stop.
Yeah. And like I said, some kids are learning to walk. I know toddlers learning to walk. Is that at that age, they remember the first time they got into a pool and they couldn't even float for more than 5 seconds. So that's fresh in their mind. But most adults, and most adults, when they get to the age of 30, I think 30 is a good age when you might think of learning something new. They forget that they were ever bad at something because they're so focused on what they're doing for a living and what they're really good at, what they've been practicing all their life. When I say all their life, of course, some people choose their career in college, some people just choose it naturally. But whatever path they take, there's something that they're good at, and they're good at because they actually practice it when they were bad at everything. So they got good at this one thing, and then because they got good at it, it actually gave them a positive feedback loop where they were getting rewarded for getting good at something. So they forget that it probably was pretty painful when they first started that.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes that pain can be a bit motivating because it's one way of holding yourself accountable of, okay, this will be the worst I am at this. I can't possibly get worse, although you can get worse at something, but it is part of the process. But yeah, I think you're right, though. When people do get older, you get fixed in a regimen of this is what I am destined to do. This is how my mind is set, and I can't do anything else. Or maybe that's an unconscious series of thoughts that it's it's easier to not try something new.
And maybe this is a topic for a future episode because there's a book written. I'll have to search that out, and maybe for another episode. But there was something where a particular person, I can't remember the name, but basically what they said was that you see all these parents and they're taking their kids to swimming, violin, summer camp, space camp, and they're sitting at the sidelines and playing with their phone. And if you ask them to learn something new, they're like, I can't do it, but they're forcing their own kids to learn 20 different things. So, so I think that's like this connotation that you can't really go to an adult, let's say a coworker, and say, hey, why don't you think of yourself as a kid? Or why don't you pretend you're your 6-year-old daughter? That kind of turns people off. So maybe in a future episode, we can talk about
neuroplasticity.
And in terms of how it's about science behind that, exactly, to see I think there's a recent research that shows that neuroplasticity stays constant even as an adult, right?
And it staves off dementia, learning a new language or a new skill. New language is in a spoken language versus a coding language, but either skill would apply in a situation that you can hold off the natural progression of dementia or any of those diseases that would affect the brain and what we would refer to as aging, that you don't have to grow old in thought. If you keep learning, you're going to strengthen those neural connections and be young in the brain.
Okay.
Which is what this is all about.
Right. So you said that even though you're going to suck at something, and that sucks, of course, but how do you actually accomplish that? How do you power through to the other side, so to speak, where you're going to start learning something new?
For me, it's a process of acknowledging that it's hard, that there's shame associated with getting out there and doing something. Certainly, if there are other people who are watching, that's really difficult to separate. Okay, I'm doing this for the first time, or even if it's the millionth time, it's okay. Like, I'm always learning. Like, something like surfing is every single time. Oh yeah, this is actually really difficult, but it's amazing to be out on the ocean, even if people are watching me. And I acknowledge that shame and sit with it, and it's okay.
Right.
And I just do it because I know that I'm getting better. I'm learning something. Sometimes it is painful, but it's also a process of little steps of, okay, what is like the very first thing that I need to do. Is that too big of a problem? I'm going to break that down into smaller problems until I get to the point where it's a small problem, such a small problem of this is the first step.
Right.
This is how I get out there, and this is what I need to do. But it does come back to that childlike sense of, yeah, just do it. Just get out there and just do it. Yeah, it just suck. But like just keep sucking, and then sometimes you don't suck. So, yeah.
Maybe, well, I think this is a universal problem because I was thinking maybe that's a cultural issue. And when I say cultural, maybe either tied to the United States or maybe tied to how we were brought up. And when I say we, as in our parents, at least my parents put a lot of emphasis on learning and doing well. But I think this might be a universal problem. So again, maybe something we can talk about in a future episode, because sucking at something is not allowed. If that makes sense. But,
so then my whole life is a lie. I'm kidding. But yeah, I've done a lot of things that I don't know how anyone could get anything done if that adage were true. Because then what's the point of challenging yourself? What's the point of taking on something that you've never done before?
But what I mean
if
is
not
that
to suck at it.
Yeah, let's say your boss says, "Oh, Alicia, I'd like you to work on this new project, or I'd like to work on this new software, or I'd like you to learn a new instrument." Let's say you were in orchestra. I don't know how orchestras work, but let's say, okay, you've been playing the flute all your life. Why didn't you start playing the violin? I don't know. But what I mean is that
I think Bob Dylan did that with his band for that song "Everybody Must Get Stoned," and it's made to sound like a band where everybody's stoned. It's really effective, actually. But yeah, it's actually a brilliant technique. But I don't know that would apply for an orchestra. But I'm sure there are conductors actually who can play 20 different instruments, and because of that ability to just jump to another instrument, that's brain strengthening. But I know that's not where you were getting at. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think yes. But what I mean is that no one is allowed to say to the boss, right? "Oh yeah, I'm going to take 3 months to suck at this." That's not allowed. That I think is universally not allowed.
To a project that I did last year where that very thing happened, and it was fine. I learned a lot, and I did get what I needed to get done. It took longer than it would have a more experienced engineer, but in the process, I learned a lot about how to delegate and when to ask the right kinds of questions. I would say that, yes, there is that culture that permeates certain companies where you're not allowed to suck. But my hope would be that people would grow to learn that sucking is awesome because you can take away so much from that challenge of being terrible at something. Turn it around.
But you have to remember that I've got one foot in the sky. I don't know if I'm getting the metaphor, but basically what I'm hoping for a world where on project plans, right? On let's say that now you're in a company, right? You're an organization, a large company, and you have a project plan, and you have set, and the project manager says, "Okay, team, let's set aside 25% of our time, which is 3 months out of every year, to suck at something." That's what I'm saying. I'm saying acknowledge it to everyone in the organization and say, "Hey, it's perfectly fine to suck at something." And there are some companies that actually do that. And I think that's also another great topic for another episode. Like, for instance, Google, I think, was the one that started the 20% free time.
Yes.
Yeah.
It really does stem from acknowledgement from the top saying we need people who have a growth mindset. And when you start with something new, and it can be very discouraging, especially if you're in a high pressure environment where you need to churn out product, that it can be counterintuitive, but you really do bring about a sense of, okay, like I'm psychologically safe to screw up, to just do something wrong because I'm doing. And the fact of just doing something, that in and of itself is awesome, which it does sound counterintuitive because you aren't necessarily like meeting a time goal, but then that's when you become a little more agile in your process of finishing a product and stretching that goal.
Yeah.
It's a process.
Yeah. That's right. And the way I actually powered through this is actually I've got two pieces of advice, and one piece of advice that actually everybody I've ever told this to, including you, came back and said was
I still use this.
My advice was, and again, I think coming back to this is, it's probably a mindset issue, and it could be again a whole episode. But my advice, and this is something that everyone I've ever given this to has called me, in fact, and said has thanked me for that. So I know it either works or it's done some good, no harm. Is just think that anything you're going to learn in the next few weeks is probably going to be the easiest thing you're going to do in your life, because most people do want to earn more, they want to get better at something, they want to move on in their careers. So even if it's hard right now, there's going to become a time when it's so easy that you literally can do it in your sleep. So you just have to remember that what you're feeling right now is not how you're going to feel in a year from now. And you have to remember the past times in your life when you've been able to make that happen. It could be something as simple as a year ago when you could barely even figure out how to get into a building. Or I need to come up with a better example. I'm bad at examples, but maybe you can be the example person, the one who comes
up with no pressure. Honestly, like I feel that way about every single thing that I do, because every single day I'm presented with something that I had either never heard of, or it's something that I had heard of but presented in a new way, in a new sort of situation. Just in terms of, certainly when you're scaling a project, that can stretch your brain into like new ways of learning how databases work, and how and why you would like create index tables, and how you can get into locking, and all these terms that are in one sense esoteric, but then on the other hand, like getting used to that, it's like, oh wait, I didn't know that last year, but I totally know that now, and I know why certain things have to be done in such a way to prevent situations in which customers would be complaining, for example. But at the time, it was just panic.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're both not example people, so I think we should come beforehand.
I'm also trying to avoid specifics without coming. Yeah, there's copyright issues, I think, with getting too specific about my employer.
I think even with examples, what I think is come up with something that's, oh man, I can't think of the word, but what I mean is something that people can identify. Even if we come up with an example in a different industry. One example, just was an example, because we had talked about this, was for anyone starting to cook, right, in, say, a restaurant, they're always given the sous chef job, and they're onions, and they're peeling potatoes, and they take a lot of time to do that. And then there's a time when they can do it literally without watching their fingers. And something like that is an example. We might have to cut this out of the final episode, because I'm not making much sense.
We come up with a good example of but I have, for the last 8 years, have been trying to learn how to play guitar. And this is not a great example, but I can play a watered down version of Malaguena, and some scales, some shapes of notes. But it's one of those things that I have gotten better because I've taken on little challenges of, I could never do that because I can't stretch my fingers that far. Something that's really silly. And the reality is just, oh no, wait, this just takes like concentrated practice every single day for like even just 5 minutes. And it starts to become almost second nature. I'm still not good by any means, but it's one of those things, like you're turning that daunting pit in the stomach into, I'm really excited to accomplish this, even if it's just something as like playing a scale on a guitar.
Right. Speaking of pit in a stomach, I do have another bit of advice. And this was actually when I first started stand-up. My friends also did it. I roped myself into doing stand-up for about a year. And I remember the very first time I got up on stage, my friend had just ordered a glass of scotch on the rocks. And he was settling down to enjoy
Why
it.
would you ruin scotch that way? Sorry, go ahead.
And I grabbed it and I downed the entire scotch glass in 2 gulps just before I was
Wow.
going to get up on stage. You should have seen his face. But I honestly, and I've never done this in my life, and that was actually one of the times when I actually decided, okay, what is it? Why is learning? I honestly was considering breaking up with all of my friends. And most people think I'm joking, but I honestly came up with a plan that just before I was about to get up on stage about how I could stop talking to my friends because I wanted to run out of that comedy club. And
I believe it. That level of shame, it's real. It's the kind of thing of your brain is trying to protect you. You go into flight mode and you happen to be in flight mode.
And as soon as I got up on the stage, everything went away and I got the first laugh and that was it. I was hooked on that. From that day onwards, I was just basically hooked. And one of the things, and I think this is useful because I don't think a lot of people are going to try stand up because it is scary. But what I mean is that, or some of our audience members might. But here's something that's I think
Probably
more
a safe
useful.
place to be improv.
Here's something that I think is actionable. I think that's a very weird term. But what I mean is that's one thing I realized is that just showing up, and this is something you also talked about, just showing up makes you better than 50% of all the people who are trying to do that. And what I mean by that is, at least in terms of comedy, like just that day itself, I saw a couple of people who were also doing comedy for the first time, and they got on stage and they basically were trying to form jokes on the fly. They didn't prepare. And that's what I mean by showing up. Just preparing, just sitting down and saying, okay, let me give my best shot at this, even if I fail. That itself makes you better than 50% of everyone on the planet.
Yeah. And some of the best comedians on the planet, like they will prepare stuff and they'll test it in front of an audience, but they will take they'll make a concerted effort to prep a whole bit or several bits, and then when they're on stage, test an audience. But and I guess if you are doing improv or if you're doing some kind of like audience interaction, maybe you would form a joke on the moment or on the fly. But I can't imagine doing stand up and then just before you're about to go on, just starting to write jokes. Like, it'd be like, knock.
It was literally what you're just saying. Basically, they were trying to form a knock-knock joke on the spur of the moment. And it wasn't like they're trying to be funny. So what I'm saying is, and I see that even in
I feel bad for the audience.
Like even at interviews, there are people who have been programming for, okay, let me give you one funny story. There was a time when I was interviewing programmers. I've got a lot of great programmer interview stories. Some of them. So there's a time we were trying to interview a programmer, right? And this programmer has actually been working successfully at a law firm. He was the only programmer and he was earning decent money and he's working successfully. And he wanted to really move on and we were interviewing for the job. And he said, okay, I'm in front of your office. I can't find you guys. And we stepped out of the office and no one was there. And we said, where are you? And he's describing the place. And we're like, no, that's not the location. You're up the street. Turn your car around and come to our office. And he's, no, I don't think that's the correct place. And my partner is not as patient as me. I'm my business partner. So he grabbed the phone and he said, look, I'm going to tell you how to get to our office because I see your car up the street. Put your hands on the steering wheel. Turn it around 360 degrees. Turn your car 360 degrees around.
180 degrees.
180 degrees, exactly. Put your foot on the pedal. Accelerate till you hit the stop sign, then stop and park your car. That's how you get to your office. And he finally gets you up. But that's what I'm saying. Just if you just showed up, we would have probably offered him the job because we weren't really picky. But the fact that he was arguing with us and saying, you guys don't know where your office is.
Wow. That's a really great way to start an interview. Like just immediately break into an argument with your prospective employer. That's genius.
Yeah, that's what I mean by showing up just means sometimes in some cases literally showing up.
Yeah, I mean, that I would use a 50%, but the way that you would describe the actual preparation, I would say that'll make you 90% better
Of course, yes,
than
yes.
people who otherwise wouldn't give it a second thought. And yeah, coding interviews have their own special place, like whiteboarding and
Mhm.
doing those algorithms that you're never going to use on the job itself. What it comes down to is, okay,
Mhm.
if you're faced with a challenge, can you get along with the people you work with
Right,
or
right.
will be working with? And can you talk in such a way that you can make complete sentences, you can
Mhm.
tell a story about a problem from beginning, middle, end. And like these are like fundamental skills. And it's difficult sometimes when you're nervous or
Mhm.
faced with something that is such a daunting topic that is
Mhm.
technical skills. But it's
Yeah.
really just breaking it down into smaller and smaller parts until it's easy. You could do it in your sleep.
Right. If you were to summarize actually what people would need to do to punch through, what would you suggest to our audience?
I always go back to Dr. Dweck's statement, and I'm paraphrasing, but
Mhm.
she talks about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset.
Mhm.
And a fixed mindset would have that concept of if I learn this, if I'm
Uh-huh.
smart enough to learn this, whereas a growth mindset would simply say when I learn this. And sometimes that takes time. Sometimes it takes practice. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
tedious and painful. And sometimes it's a matter of looking at things with a new perspective. But if you think when I learn this,
Mhm.
you start to open up a world of possibilities of, oh, I could learn anything.
Yeah, I think that's a great stopping point. And I hope for our hope basically and is that we believe that for anyone looking to learn something new as an adult, I think coding is a great first step. And I think our next episode is going to cover why coding is a great first step because, and I don't want to get into too much detail, but hopefully we show you how to start learning as an adult. And we use coding like a platform, an example. I know we're bad at examples, but maybe what I mean is that I think coding is a great way to learn how to start learning as an adult. And that's what we hope to do with this
Yeah.
podcast. And I think on the next episode, what we're planning to do is actually try to convince anyone who's listening in why learning as an adult is important and how they can actually start to code, even if they don't want to become programmers. I think a lot of people could benefit from coding and actually using that to learn something new in their life. Any thoughts, Alicia?
I agree 100%.
All right.
Yeah, but coding is something I think a lot of people actually do day to day without realizing it. And I think people already have the skill and the ability to break down problems into subroutines and algorithms. I'm just going to throw in some buzzwords just because I can.
All right. I think we need to also come up with the ending catchphrase, but I think we can add that in post.
This podcast is brought to you by Self-Doubt.
All right. Take care and let's see everyone the next time. Bye.
Bye.